1 joint of beef. 7 days of dinners. To your Nan, that was never a challenge. It was simply how a kitchen ran. The Sunday roast was not the meal. It was the beginning of the meal, the foundation the whole week was built upon, reworked and stretched until even the bones had given everything they had. Nothing was thrown out. Nothing was wasted. Every sliver of meat, every spoonful of fat, every last drop of gravy had a second life, and very often a third. Today we would scrape half of it into the bin. She fed a family of 6 clean through to Saturday. These are the 25 ways your Nan made one Sunday roast last all week, and number 1 still feels like a kind of magic. Let's begin the countdown. Number 25. Carving thin. It began the moment the joint hit the board. Your Nan carved that beef so fine you could nearly read the newspaper through it, and this was not fussiness, it was arithmetic. A joint cost the best part of a week's housekeeping, 4 or 5 shillings for a decent piece in the 1950s, and thick slices were the fastest way to see it gone by Monday. She sharpened the carving knife on the steel with 3 quick strokes, held the meat steady with a 2-pronged fork, and shaved off slices barely thicker than a coin. Everyone got a proper plateful. It looked generous, and yet somehow half the joint was still sitting there under a plate on the cold slab. That was the whole trick. Thin carving made a small joint look like plenty and left a mountain of cold meat waiting for the days ahead. Number 24. The dripping jar. The moment the roasting tin came out of the oven, your Nan was already thinking about the fat. She poured the hot beef drippings through a fine sieve, or a square of muslin if she was being particular, into a waiting ceramic pot or kilner jar that lived on the warming plate of the Aga. As it cooled, it set into 2 layers, a golden band of clean dripping on top and a dark, savory jelly beneath. That jelly, the meat juices, was flavor you simply could not buy, and it went into every gravy for the rest of the week. The clean fat above fried the eggs, roasted the next lot of potatoes, and greased the cake tins. A joint gave up half a jar of dripping, and in a house where nothing was spare, that fat was money you had already spent and refused to throw away. Number 23. Bubble and Squeak. Monday tea time belonged to Bubble and Squeak, and the name told you exactly what it sounded like. The vegetables hissing and spitting as they hit the hot fat. Your Nan gathered up Sunday's cold mash and whatever cabbage, sprouts, or swede had survived the day, mashed the lot together with a fork, and pressed it into the pan in a thick cake fried in beef dripping. She let it sit without touching it, because the whole point was the crust, that dark brown underside that formed where the potato caught the fat. Then she turned it, browned the other side, and cut it into wedges. A knob of cold beef laid on top made it a proper tea. It cost nothing. It used up the very things a modern kitchen bins, and the smell of it frying meant Monday. Number 22. Cold-cut sandwiches. By Monday morning, the cold beef was already earning its keep in the lunch pails. Your Nan buttered doorstep slices of bread right to the edges, laid on the thin beef, added a smear of English mustard or a spoon of piccalilli, and pressed the whole thing flat so it would travel. Wrapped in greaseproof and tucked into a tin, this was what fed the men down the pit or on the factory floor, and the children at school. A joint that had served 6 at Sunday dinner could still be turning out sandwiches on Wednesday if she carved it careful. The cold beef sandwich asked nothing of her but a sharp knife and a loaf, cost a fraction of anything from a shop, and quietly stretched 1 roast across the working week, meal by meal, without anyone feeling they were eating leftovers at all. Number 21. Saving the gravy. Not 1 drop of gravy ever went down the sink. What was left in the boat got poured into a cup, covered, and set on the cold slab, where it thickened overnight into a dark, savory jelly. Your Nan warmed it through again on Monday, loosened it with a splash from the kettle and a crumbled OXO cube if it needed reviving, and it dressed the bubble and squeak or moistened the cottage pie. Gravy was not a thing you made fresh every day. It was a thing you kept going, topped up and stretched, carrying the flavor of Sunday's joint right through to Thursday. A tablespoon of leftover gravy stirred into a pan of mince turned plain into proper. In her kitchen, gravy was almost a living thing, kept alive in a cup on the slab, feeding meal after meal. Number 20. Fat for the next roasties. The clean beef dripping skimmed off the top of the jar had one job it did better than anything, and that was roast potatoes. When your Nan next had spuds to roast midweek, alongside a bit of sausage or a cheap chop, she got that dripping smoking hot in the tin before the parboiled potatoes ever went near it. They hit the fat with a hiss, and because beef dripping runs hotter and cleaner than any oil, they crisped into that shattering golden shell nothing else quite manages. The potatoes tasted faintly of the Sunday joint days after the beef itself was gone. She never bought lard or oil for the purpose, while the dripping jar had something in it, which was most of the time. One roast, quietly seasoning every plate of potatoes for the rest of the week. Number 19. The stock pot from Bones. The bones were never rubbish. The moment the joint was carved to the bone, your Nan cracked them, dropped them into her biggest pot with an onion, a carrot, a bay leaf, and the papery bits nobody else wanted, covered them with water, and set the whole thing to tick over on the back of the range for hours. The kitchen filled with a deep, savory steam. What she drew off was stock, and stock was the secret engine of the entire week, the base for the soup, the liquid for the stew, the thing that made watery mince taste of something. Bones you could not eat gave up their goodness into a broth that fed everyone. A butcher would often give bones away for the asking, but your Nan already had the best ones, the ones her own Sunday joint left behind. Number 18. Rissoles. Here is where the real cleverness started, because now she was making the meat go further than it had any right to. Your Nan minced the last of the cold beef through the hand grinder clamped to the table edge, and then she stretched it. 2 slices of bread soaked in a little milk until they turned to mush, squeezed out and worked through the mince with a beaten egg and a shake of pepper. That soaked bread was the trick. Chefs call it a panade now and act as if it were French, but she called it making do. The bread held moisture through the pan, so the rissoles came out juicy instead of dry, and it turned a few ounces of leftover beef into 8 patties that fed the family. Shaped, rolled in a little flour, and fried in dripping till brown, one Sunday's scraps became a whole Tuesday tea. Number 17. Shepherd's pie. Or cottage pie, if we are being strict, since it was beef. This was the workhorse of the leftover week, the dish that could swallow almost anything and turn it into supper. Your Nan put the minced cold beef in a dish, softened an onion in dripping and tipped it in, moistened the lot with that saved gravy and a shake of Worcester sauce, and covered the whole thing with a thick layer of mashed potato dragged into peaks with a fork so it would crisp. 20 minutes in a hot oven and the peaks browned. The gravy bubbled up round the edges, and a handful of scraps became a pie that filled every seat at the table. She often laid a few slices of leftover carrot underneath. It cost almost nothing beyond the potatoes, and it was many a child's favorite meal of the week. Number 16. Curried leftovers. By Wednesday, when the family might have started to notice they had been eating the same beef for 3 days, your Nan changed its coat entirely. A spoon of curry powder from the tin in the cupboard, an onion, a chopped apple for sweetness, a handful of sultanas, and the last of the diced beef simmered in gravy and stock until it thickened. Served over rice, or more often mashed potato, this was mild by today's lights, a gentle golden curry, but it tasted like something brand new. That was the point. The same meat, disguised so thoroughly that nobody complained it was leftovers again. Curry powder had been in British pantries since the days of the Empire, and every thrifty cook knew it was the fastest way to make Sunday's beef feel like a different meal entirely. One joint, wearing a different flavor every night of the week. Number 15. Potted meat. Here is where things get interesting. When the beef was down to shreds too small to slice, your Nan pounded them. She minced the last scraps twice, worked in a little softened butter, a scrape of mace, a pinch of pepper, and pressed the paste into small pots, sealing the top with a layer of clarified butter to keep the air out. That seal meant it kept for days on the cold slab without a fridge. Spread on bread, potted meat carried a working man through an afternoon shift, and it used the very last morsels that would otherwise have gone begging. Now here is the part the shops did not want you to know. When supermarkets arrived with their sealed packs of uniform sliced ham, they did not just sell you convenience, they sold you the forgetting. Nobody potted meat anymore because nobody needed to. But your Nan turned the scraps into a delicacy, and it cost her nothing but a spoonful of butter. Number 14. Croquettes and fritters. Cold mashed potato had a second life your Nan never let it miss. She bound the leftover mash with a beaten egg, folded through any shreds of beef too small for anything else, rolled the mixture into little logs or flat cakes, dipped them in egg and breadcrumbs, and fried them golden and crisp in the dripping. Croquettes on the outside, soft and savory within, they turned the humblest leftovers into something the children thought was a treat. If there was a spoon of leftover peas or a bit of corned beef in the tin, that went in too. Nothing was too small to fritter. A cold plate of odds and ends that a modern kitchen would scrape away became a hot, crunchy supper for the price of 1 egg and a handful of stale bread crumbed on the grater. This was thrift dressed up as indulgence.
Number 13, Cornish pasties. Come Thursday, when the diced beef was nearly done, your Nan sealed the last of it inside pastry. A rough short crust made with flour and a bit of that, saved dripping, rolled out and cut into rounds, then piled with the last beef, a diced potato, a bit of swede and onion, all raw, seasoned hard with salt and pepper. She crimped the edge into that rope along the top, brushed it with milk, and baked it until the pastry turned deep gold, and the whole kitchen smelled of Sunday all over again. The genius of the pasty was that it carried, cold in a coat pocket or a lunch tin, a whole dinner sealed in its own crust with no plate and no fork needed. A few ounces of leftover beef, wrapped in cheap pastry and cheaper vegetables, became a meal a grown man could work a shift on. Number 12. Hash. When the leftovers had dwindled to almost nothing, your Nan reached for the hash. Whatever was left, a bit of beef, some cold potato, an onion, all diced small and fried together in a hot pan, with dripping until the underside caught and crisped into a brown crust. She pressed it down with the back of the spoon, let it sit, then turned it in sections so every bit got its share of the crust. A fried egg on top, its yolk running down into the crisp potato, and a plate that had cost her the price of 1 egg fed a hungry family. Hash was the dish that admitted there was almost nothing left and made a virtue of it anyway. The brown bits,
the ones stuck to the pan, were always fought over. In a thrifty kitchen, the scrapings were the best part. Number 11. Stovies. North of the border, the same instinct had its own name and its own devoted following. Stovies were the Scottish answer to the leftover roast, potatoes stewed slowly in dripping and stock until they half collapsed, with the shreds of cold beef stirred through and an onion melting into the lot. Your Nan, if she came from that tradition, cooked it low and slow in a heavy pot, no rush, letting the potatoes soak up every bit of the meat juices until the whole thing turned soft and savory and golden. Served with a splash of the saved gravy and a round of oatcakes, it was pure comfort on a cold night. The beauty of Stovies was that the meat almost disappeared into the potatoes, its flavor everywhere but its quantity tiny. A handful of beef, a pot of potatoes, and a family fed for pennies. Number 10. The cold ploughman's supper. Not every night needed cooking, and your Nan knew that a good cold spread was a meal in its own right. On a warm evening, or a night she was worn out, she laid the last of the cold beef on a board with a wedge of cheese, a heap of piccalilli or pickled onions from the jar, a chunk of bread and a bit of butter, and called it supper. There was no shame in it. A ploughman's built around Sunday's leftover meat was filling. It needed no oven on a hot day, and it used the last decent slices before they turned. The pickles did the work of making it feel like a proper meal rather than scraps. It was the kind of tea that let her put her feet up for once, and still the roast was earning its keep, right down to the final slice. Number 9. Leftover Yorkshire puddings. The Yorkshires that survived Sunday did not get thrown away. They got pudding duty. Your Nan warmed the leftover Yorkshire puddings in the oven until they crisped back up, then filled them. And here was the clever turn. Filled them sweet. A spoon of golden syrup, or a bit of jam and a splash of warm milk, turned yesterday's savory batter into a hot pudding for afters. Up north, this was no novelty. The Yorkshire pudding had always been served first, on its own with gravy, precisely to fill children up before the meat came round, so that less meat was needed. Nothing about the Yorkshire was wasted, not on the day and not after. A batter made from a cup of flour, an egg, and some milk, costing next to nothing, fed the family twice, once with gravy and once with syrup. Number 8. Faggots. Here is where the thrifty cook got truly fearless. Faggots were made from the parts most people today would not look at: the liver, the heart, the odds and ends the butcher near enough gave away, minced with breadcrumbs, onion, and sage, wrapped in caul fat, and baked in a rich onion gravy until dark and glistening. If your Nan had bought a bit of offal alongside the joint, faggots were how she stretched the meat budget even further. A whole tray of them for the price of a few pence. Served with mushy peas and thick gravy, they were a Black Country and Welsh Valley staple, deeply savory, filling, and shockingly cheap. Children either loved them or fled the kitchen. There was rarely a middle ground. But faggots were proof of a truth your Nan lived by, that with enough skill and enough sage, even the humblest scraps became a supper worth sitting down to. Number 7. Dumplings to bulk the stew. By the time the leftover beef went into a stew, there was not much of it, and your Nan knew exactly how to make a thin pot feed a full table. Dumplings. Flour and suet mixed with a little water and salt, rolled into pale balls and dropped onto the top of the simmering stew, where they swelled up light and doubled in size as they steamed under the lid. They cost pennies a pound, suet being about the cheapest thing in the shop, and they soaked up the savory broth so that even a few shreds of meat felt like a hearty dinner. The lid rattled gently as they cooked, and that sound meant tea was close. A pot with barely a handful of beef in it bulked out with 3 or 4 dumplings ahead, and suddenly nobody rose from the table, still hungry. Number 6. The second day hot pot. When the beef and its stock came together late in the week, your Nan built a hot pot. She layered the last of the meat and any vegetables with thin slices of potato, arranged like roof tiles across the top, poured over the saved stock and gravy, and baked it slow for hours until the potatoes on top crisped and browned, while everything beneath turned soft and rich. This was the dish that gave the roast one last proper hurrah. A whole baked supper conjured from remnants that on their own looked like nothing. The crisp potato crust was fought over, same as always. What made it clever was the slow oven doing the work, coaxing flavor and tenderness out of scraps and cheap potatoes with nothing but time. One joint of beef, days old now, still anchoring a full hot dinner for the family. Number 5. Mock brawn. When the joint had a bone with meat still clinging to it, and a bit of trotter or shin from the butcher, your Nan made a pressed cold meat that filled the larder for days. She simmered the bones and scraps for hours until the meat fell away and the liquid turned thick with natural gelatine. Then pressed the shredded meat into a basin and let it set in its own jelly on the cold slab. Turned out and sliced, it was a firm, savory cold cut that spread across the tea table, meal after meal, served with pickles and bread. It cost almost nothing because it was built from the parts nobody else wanted. Brawn looked unsettling to a child, all that trembling jelly. But the fathers and grandfathers ate it with relish. It was the roast's afterlife, set solid and sliced thin, wasting not one scrap of the animal. Number 4. The carcass broth. By Thursday, the bones had one more meal in them. Your Nan took the stock she had drawn from the Sunday bones, added a handful of pearl barley, an onion, whatever vegetables were softening in the rack, and any last shreds of meat, and simmered the lot into a thick, sustaining broth. This was the meal that officially closed the roast's account. A soup so hearty it was near enough a stew, so dense with barley that the spoon would very nearly stand up in it. A round of bread on the side to dip, and it warmed a family through a cold evening for the cost of the barley alone. Everything else had already been paid for on Sunday. The broth was where the joint finally gave up the very last of its goodness, poured steaming into bowls, still feeding the family 4 days after it left the oven. Number 3. Beef tea. There was one more thing the bones could do, and it was reserved for the poorly. When a child was laid up with a fever, or the grandfather was fading in the cold months, your Nan made beef tea, a clear, concentrated broth simmered gently from the last of the bones and meat scraps, strained until it ran pale gold and pure. It was not a meal so much as a medicine, easy on a weak stomach, warm and nourishing, sipped from a cup by the fireside. Doctors of the day genuinely prescribed it. To make it from the leftovers of the Sunday joint, when a shop-bought remedy cost real money, was thrift and tenderness in the same pot. The roast that had fed the whole family all week ended its life keeping the sick one warm. Nothing that beef could give was ever left unused. Number 2. Bread and dripping. And so we come to the very bottom of the jar, quite literally. The dark, jellied dripping from beneath the clean fat, the part heavy with the meat juices, went on to thick slices of bread with nothing but a pinch of salt. And it was supper. Bread and dripping was the plainest thing in the post-war kitchen and one of the most loved. The soft crumb soaking up that savory fat that carried the faint, unmistakable memory of Sunday's beef long after the meat itself was gone. A 2-pound loaf cost pennies, and the dripping had cost nothing at all, skimmed free from the roasting tin days before. Children who grew up on it still speak of it with a shine in their eye. You could taste last Sunday's roast in it, even now, on a Saturday, even when it was only bread and salt and fat. Number 1. The perpetual stock pot. And at the very top, the one thing that tied the whole week together, the pot that never truly emptied. In your Nan's kitchen there was a stock pot that lived on the back of the range and was never quite finished, only ever topped up. Sunday's bones went in, then the vegetable trimmings, the outer leaves, the ends of things, a splash of the leftover gravy, and it ticked over quietly, day after day, giving up its liquid into every soup, every stew, every gravy of the week, and then being fed again. It was less a recipe than a philosophy, the belief that a kitchen should always have something on the go, and nothing should ever be thrown away while it still had goodness to give. That single Sunday roast did not just last the week. It fed the pot, and the pot fed everything else. That was the real magic, and it never once cost her a penny more. So there you have it. 1 joint of beef, and a family fed clean through to Saturday, right down to the bread and dripping and the broth for the poorly. Your Nan was not being nostalgic. She was being brilliant. Which of these did your own Nan swear by, and which have you never seen since? Let me know down in the comments. Because she knew something we forgot, and now you know it too.